In the shadows of the magnificent Valdoria Palace, where golden spires pierce the morning mist and ancient stones whisper secrets of centuries past, loyalty can be as fragile as glass and power as deadly as poison. Captain Marcus Thornfield has served the crown for 15 years, his sword sworn to protect the realm's most sacred truths. But when a single leather-bound journal falls into his weathered hands during a routine security sweep, he discovers that the greatest threat to the kingdom may not come from foreign armies or rebel uprisings. It may come from within the very walls he has sworn to defend. Some secrets are worth killing for. Others are worth dying to protect. And in the treacherous game of royal politics, the difference between the two can determine the fate of an entire nation. Captain Marcus Thornfield adjusted his silver-trimmed uniform as he walked through the east wing of Valdoria Palace, his boots echoing against marble floors that had witnessed 3 centuries of royal intrigue. The morning sun filtered through towering stained-glass windows, casting colorful patterns across tapestries depicting the glorious history of the Aldermarch dynasty. At 42, Marcus had served the crown longer than most men served their wives, and he knew every secret passage, every hidden alcove, every whispered rumor that danced through these hallowed halls. The palace buzzed with unusual energy today. Queen Regent Alara had announced her intention to formally transfer power to Crown Prince William on his upcoming 25th birthday, a ceremony that would mark the end of her 10-year regency following the sudden death of King Edmund. The transition had been anticipated for months, with nobles from across the 7 kingdoms arriving to witness the coronation. But Marcus sensed something else in the air. A tension that made his seasoned soldier's instincts prickle with unease. He had been conducting his weekly security inspection of the regent's private chambers when he discovered it. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Lady Cassandra's study, the Queen Regent's closest advisor and confidant, lay a small leather journal bound with a crimson ribbon. Marcus had initially assumed it was simply a personal diary, but the royal seal pressed into the leather cover suggested something far more significant. Lady Cassandra Morven had been Queen Ilara's companion since childhood, rising from minor nobility to become the most trusted voice in the royal council. Her influence over the regent was well known throughout the court, and many whispered that no major decision was made without her counsel. She was a woman of sharp intelligence and even sharper ambition, with steel-grey hair always pulled back in an elegant knot and eyes that seemed to see through every facade. As Marcus carefully examined the journal in the privacy of his quarters that evening, his blood grew cold. The pages contained detailed correspondence between Lady Cassandra and several high-ranking nobles, including Duke Aldrich of Westmarch and Duchess Helena of Raven's Hollow. The letters spoke in coded language about the boy's unfitness for rule and the necessity of alternative arrangements. More damning still were references to substantial financial transactions, payments made to key members of the Royal Guard, and detailed plans for what they termed the transition. The most chilling entry was dated just 3 days prior. The prince's coronation must be delayed indefinitely. Our contacts within the Temple of the Sacred Crown have been informed. The Archbishop will discover irregularities in the ancient texts that question the legitimacy of the ceremony. Meanwhile, our friends in the Treasury have prepared evidence of William's financial improprieties. The regent will have no choice but to extend her rule for the good of the kingdom. Marcus set the journal down with trembling hands. He had witnessed court intrigue before, but this was different. This was treason of the highest order, a conspiracy to prevent the rightful heir from claiming his throne. Lady Cassandra wasn't just advising the regent, she was orchestrating a silent coup that would keep Queen Ilara in power indefinitely while gradually transferring real authority to the conspirators themselves. The next morning brought disturbing confirmations of the journal's allegations. During the daily briefing with the palace guard, Marcus learned that 3 senior officers had recently received substantial bonuses from an anonymous benefactor, the same officers who controlled access to the prince's quarters and the treasury vaults. Captain Helena Greystone, his most trusted lieutenant, mentioned that several servants had been asking unusual questions about the prince's daily routine and personal habits. More troubling still was the news from the palace kitchens. The head cook, a loyal woman named Martha who had served the royal family for 30 years, quietly approached Marcus during his afternoon rounds. She spoke in hushed tones about strange requests from Lady Cassandra's staff. Specific herbs and powders that could cause illness without being fatal. Substances that could make someone appear unwell enough to postpone important ceremonies. "Captain Thornfield," Martha whispered, glancing nervously around the empty corridor. "I've served this family since before the prince was born. Something isn't right. The lady has been asking for things that no honest person should need, and there are visitors coming to her chambers at odd hours. People I don't recognize wearing cloaks and speaking in foreign tongues." Marcus thanked Martha and assured her that her concerns would be investigated. But privately, he wrestled with an impossible decision. As captain of the royal guard, his duty was to protect the crown and preserve the stability of the realm. But who was the true sovereign he should serve? The Queen Regent, whose authority was legitimate but might be compromised by treacherous advisors? The Crown Prince, whose right to rule was unquestionable but who remained unaware of the danger surrounding him? Or the abstract concept of the crown itself, which transcended any individual ruler? That evening, Marcus requested a private audience with Prince William. The prince received him in his study, a warm room lined with books on philosophy, military strategy, and the history of their kingdom. William was tall and lean, with the intelligent eyes of his father and the gentle demeanor of his mother. He had spent his youth preparing for kingship through careful study and practical experience in governance, earning respect even from those who might have preferred a different successor. "Captain Thornfield," the prince said, gesturing to a chair beside the fireplace. "You look troubled. Is there some threat to the palace security?" Marcus hesitated, weighing his words carefully. To reveal the conspiracy would place the prince in immediate danger, but to remain silent might allow the coup to succeed. Finally, he chose a middle path, speaking in the careful language that palace intrigue demanded. "Your Highness, I have reason to believe that certain individuals within the court may not have your best interests at heart. There are whispers of attempts to delay your coronation, perhaps indefinitely." The prince's expression grew serious. "Do you have evidence of such a plot?" "I have discovered correspondence that suggests irregular activities among some members of the royal council. I cannot yet speak with certainty about the extent of any conspiracy, but I believe caution is warranted." Prince William stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens where he had played as a child. When he turned back, his face showed a maturity beyond his years. "Captain, my mother has ruled wisely during her regency, but I know there are those who would prefer to see power remain with familiar hands. If what you suggest is true, then we are dealing with more than simple political preference. We are talking about treason." Marcus nodded gravely. "Indeed, Your Highness. And treason, as you know, is punishable by death." The weight of those words hung in the air between them. Both men understood that they stood at a crossroads that would determine not just their own fates, but the future of the kingdom itself. The prince was young but not naive. He had been educated in the harsh realities of royal politics. He knew that power attracted those who would abuse it, and that even the most trusted advisors could harbor ambitious designs. "What do you recommend, Captain?" Marcus had spent sleepless hours considering this question. "We must proceed carefully, Your Highness. If we move too quickly or too openly, we risk driving the conspirators underground where they might become even more dangerous. But if we wait too long, they may succeed in their aims. I propose that we gather more evidence while quietly securing the loyalty of key personnel. We need to know exactly who can be trusted when the moment comes to act." The prince agreed, and they spent the next hour developing a careful strategy. Marcus would continue his investigation while maintaining the appearance of normal routine. The prince would begin having private conversations with trusted members of the court to gauge their loyalties. Most importantly, they would work to protect Queen Alara from what appeared to be manipulation by her closest advisor. As Marcus left the prince's chambers that night, he felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. He had served in battles against foreign enemies and survived palace plots before, but this felt different. This time, he wasn't just protecting a person or even a crown. He was protecting the very principle of legitimate rule that held their civilization together. The following days brought a careful dance of investigation and counter-surveillance. Marcus discreetly questioned loyal servants, reviewed financial records, and monitored the movements of suspected conspirators. He discovered that Lady Cassandra had been meeting regularly with foreign ambassadors, particularly the envoy from the neighboring kingdom of Draconia, a realm that had long coveted Valdoria's strategic ports and fertile valleys. More disturbing still was evidence that the conspiracy reached into the highest levels of the church. Archbishop Cornelius, the elderly prelate who would normally crown the new king, had been receiving substantial donations to cathedral building projects from anonymous sources, the same sources that appeared to be funding Lady Cassandra's activities. The pieces of the puzzle began forming a picture that chilled Marcus to his core. This wasn't simply an attempt to delay Prince William's coronation. It was the beginning of a complete transformation of the kingdom's power structure. Lady Cassandra and her allies intended to gradually transfer authority away from the traditional monarchy toward a council system that they would control. Eventually, they might even negotiate a merger with Draconia, effectively ending Valdoria's independence. As the planned coronation date approached, the tension within the palace became almost unbearable. Servants whispered in corners, nobles gathered in suspicious clusters, and even the normally cheerful kitchen staff seemed subdued and nervous. Marcus found himself checking the locks on his chambers each night and varying his daily routes through the palace. The crisis came to a head when Martha, the loyal cook, disappeared without explanation. Her assistant found her quarters empty, with signs of a hasty departure, but no note or farewell message. Marcus immediately suspected that the conspirators had discovered her loyalty to the crown and either eliminated her or forced her to flee. The message was clear. No one was safe if they threatened the plot. That same evening, Prince William received an urgent summons to his mother's chambers. When he arrived, he found Queen Alara in obvious distress, with Lady Cassandra hovering nearby like a protective hawk. The regent's face was pale, and her hands shook as she held a document that Marcus recognized as a fabricated financial report, one of the false evidence pieces mentioned in the stolen journal. "My son," the Queen said in a voice filled with sorrow, "I have received disturbing reports about irregularities in the Treasury records. It appears that substantial funds have been diverted from the royal accounts, and the investigators believe you may have been involved." Prince William's face showed no surprise, only a calm determination that impressed Marcus. The young man had prepared for this moment and knew how to respond. "Mother," he said gently, "I believe you have been deceived by those who do not have our family's best interests at heart. The evidence you hold is fabricated, designed to create doubt about my fitness to rule. I ask only that you consider who has brought these accusations to your attention and what they might gain from delaying my coronation." Lady Cassandra stepped forward, her voice smooth and reasonable. "Your Majesty, I understand the prince's desire to dismiss these serious allegations, but surely the integrity of the crown demands a thorough investigation before any transfer of power takes place." Marcus watched this exchange with growing alarm. He could see the genuine anguish in Queen Alara's eyes and the subtle manipulation in Lady Cassandra's manner. The regent loved her son, but had been skillfully convinced that protecting him required keeping him from the throne. The conspiracy was working exactly as planned. The confrontation in the Queen's chambers marked the end of any possibility of a peaceful resolution to the crisis. Lines had been drawn, sides had been chosen, and the fate of the kingdom would soon be decided by actions rather than words. Marcus knew that the time for investigation and careful planning was ending. Soon, he would have to choose between his oath of loyalty to the current sovereign and his duty to protect the rightful heir to the throne. As he returned to his quarters that night, Marcus reflected on the strange turns that had brought him to this moment. A simple security inspection had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened everything he had spent his life defending. The leather journal hidden beneath Lady Cassandra's floorboard had revealed a web of corruption and betrayal that reached to the very heart of the royal court. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult choices. The conspirators were moving forward with their plans, confident that they had successfully manipulated the Queen Regent and neutralized the threat posed by her son. They didn't yet know that their secret correspondence had been discovered, or that their carefully laid plans were about to face the determined opposition of a loyal soldier who refused to stand by while treason masqueraded as prudent governance. Marcus spent the final hours before dawn reviewing the names and faces of those he knew he could trust. Captain Helena Greystone, despite her questions about the strange bonuses, remained loyal to the crown. Sir Edmund Blackwood, the prince's personal bodyguard, was above suspicion. A handful of senior servants had served the royal family for decades and would never participate in any plot against them. But these loyal individuals were outnumbered by those who had been bought, threatened, or deceived into supporting Lady Cassandra's conspiracy. The coming battle would not be won by numbers or superior force. It would require cunning, careful timing, and more than a little luck. Most importantly, it would require the kind of moral courage that defined the difference between a mere soldier and a true guardian of the realm. Part 2. The morning of what should have been Prince William's coronation dawned grey and foreboding, with heavy clouds gathering over Valdoria Palace like an omen of the storm about to break within its walls. Marcus had spent the previous night in careful preparation, moving the stolen journal to a secure location and arranging discreet signals with his most trusted allies. The time for subtle investigation had passed. Now came the delicate work of exposing treason without destroying the kingdom in the process. Archbishop Cornelius had indeed announced irregularities in the ancient coronation texts, exactly as Lady Cassandra's journal had predicted. The elderly prelate stood before a hastily convened gathering of nobles in the great hall, his voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine distress but which Marcus now recognized as carefully rehearsed performance. "My lords and ladies," the archbishop declared, clutching an ornate manuscript to his chest, "after extensive consultation with the sacred texts and the most learned scholars of our order, I must report serious questions about the timing and legitimacy of today's planned ceremony. Ancient law requires a period of purification and investigation when financial improprieties are alleged against a potential monarch. Until these matters are resolved, I cannot in good conscience perform the coronation rites." The assembled nobles erupted in whispered conversations, their faces showing various degrees of surprise, concern, and calculation. Marcus watched carefully, noting which individuals seemed genuinely shocked by this development, and which appeared to have expected it. Duke Aldrich of Westmarch nodded gravely, as if this unfortunate news confirmed his worst fears, while Duchess Helena of Ravenshollow made a show of defending Prince William's character, even as she expressed reluctant agreement with the archbishop's position. Queen Alara sat upon the regent's throne, her face a mask of royal composure that couldn't quite hide her inner turmoil. Lady Cassandra stood at her right hand, playing the role of loyal counselor offering comfort during a difficult time. To most observers, the scene appeared to be an unfortunate but necessary delay in the transfer of power. Only Marcus and Prince William understood that they were witnessing a carefully orchestrated performance designed to legitimize a bloodless coup. Prince William himself showed remarkable restraint, accepting the archbishop's announcement with dignified grace, while privately exchanging meaningful glances with Marcus. The young man had inherited his father's political wisdom along with his claim to the throne, and he understood that any appearance of anger or desperation would only reinforce the conspirator's narrative about his unfitness to rule. "I respect the Archbishop's concerns," Prince William announced to the assembly, his voice carrying clearly through the great hall. "If there are questions about my conduct that must be answered before I can serve the crown, then I welcome a thorough investigation. I have nothing to hide and everything to gain from the truth coming to light." This response clearly frustrated Lady Cassandra, who had probably hoped that the prince would react with the kind of outrage that would justify further delays and restrictions. Instead, his measured response made him appear more regal and capable than many of the older nobles who were supposed to question his readiness for leadership. Following the morning's public drama, Marcus managed to arrange a private meeting with Sir Edmund Blackwood in the palace armory, a location where their conversation could not be overheard and where the presence of weapons would seem natural rather than suspicious. Edmund was a man of few words but absolute loyalty, a veteran knight whose scarred hands bore witness to decades of service to the crown. "The prince is in danger," Marcus said without preamble, knowing that Edmund could be trusted with direct communication. "The delay in coronation is part of a larger conspiracy to prevent him from ever taking the throne." Edmund's weathered face showed no surprise. "I suspected as much. Too many coincidences. Too many convenient discoveries of evidence. Who leads this conspiracy?" Marcus shared what he had learned from Lady Cassandra's journal, watching as Edmund's expression grew increasingly grim. The old knight had served King Edmund faithfully and had watched Prince William grow from a curious child into a capable young man. The idea that ambitious courtiers would steal the throne from the rightful heir filled him with a cold rage that was more dangerous than any passionate outburst. "What would you have me do?" Edmund asked simply. "Continue protecting the prince, but be prepared for the conspiracy to move beyond political maneuvering. If they cannot discredit him through false evidence, they may resort to more direct methods." The implications of this statement hung heavy in the air between them. Both men had seen enough palace intrigue to know that political opponents who could not be neutralized through scandal or manipulation often suffered tragic accidents or sudden illnesses. The royal family's history included more than one suspicious death that had conveniently resolved succession disputes. Meanwhile, Lady Cassandra was consolidating her position with remarkable efficiency. Throughout the day following the coronation postponement, she held private meetings with key nobles, emphasizing the wisdom of careful deliberation and the dangers of hasty action. She presented herself as the voice of stability and experience, the prudent advisor helping the Queen Regent navigate an unprecedented crisis. Her most important meeting was with the envoy from Draconia, a smooth-talking diplomat named Count Victor Draven, who had been residing in the palace for several weeks under the pretext of negotiating a trade agreement. Marcus had managed to position himself within earshot of their conversation by taking advantage of a secret passage that connected to Lady Cassandra's private study, a passage that had been built into the palace walls centuries earlier for exactly this kind of surveillance. "The delay provides us with the opportunity we discussed," Lady Cassandra told Count Draven, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed her plans were proceeding perfectly. The longer the prince remains under suspicion, the more the nobles will question his fitness for rule. Meanwhile, Queen Alara grows more dependent on my counsel with each passing day. Count Draven's response revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. His Majesty King Drakomar is pleased with your progress, Lady Cassandra. The trade concessions you have negotiated will prove most beneficial to both our kingdoms. Of course, such agreements require a stable and reliable partner on the throne of Valdoria. The implication was clear. Lady Cassandra had been negotiating away significant portions of Valdoria's sovereignty in exchange for draconian support for her coup. Marcus felt his blood boil as he listened to these traitors discussing the dismantling of his kingdom as if it were nothing more than a business transaction. The conversation continued with discussions of specific nobles who had been bought or coerced into supporting the conspiracy. Marcus was shocked to learn that Ducal Drake's support had been purchased with promises of favorable taxation for his lands, while Duchess Helena had been threatened with exposure of her son's gambling debts unless she cooperated. The conspiracy wasn't just about ambition, it was about creating a web of obligation and fear that would ensure long-term compliance. Most disturbing was Lady Cassandra's casual mention of contingency plans if the prince proved too difficult to control. Count Draven nodded knowingly when she referenced these plans, suggesting that both had discussed the possibility of eliminating Prince William entirely if political manipulation proved insufficient. That evening, Marcus shared this intelligence with Prince William during another carefully arranged meeting. The prince listened with growing anger as Marcus described the foreign involvement and the threats against loyal nobles. When Marcus mentioned the contingency plans, Prince William's composure finally cracked. "They would murder me for their ambition?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I believe they would murder anyone who threatens their plans," Marcus replied grimly. "Your death would be portrayed as a tragic accident or sudden illness, clearing the way for your mother to rule indefinitely under Lady Cassandra's guidance. Eventually, they might even arrange for a draconian prince to marry into our royal family, completing their conquest without ever sending an army across our borders." Prince William stood and paced to the window, his silhouette framed against the darkening sky. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of a king, regardless of whether he wore a crown or not. "Captain Thornfield, I hereby charge you with protecting the integrity of this throne and the independence of this kingdom. Use whatever means you deem necessary, but do not allow these traitors to succeed in their designs." Marcus felt the weight of royal command settle upon him, along with the terrible responsibility it entailed. He was being ordered to prevent a coup, which meant he might have to commit acts that would normally be considered treason themselves. The irony was not lost on him. To save the crown, he might have to break the very laws he had sworn to uphold. The next phase of Lady Cassandra's plan became apparent when Queen Alara announced the formation of a special investigative council to examine the allegations against Prince William. The council would be composed of carefully selected nobles, all of whom were either conspirators or individuals who could be controlled through various forms of pressure. Archbishop Cornelius would serve as the council's spiritual advisor, lending religious authority to whatever conclusions they reached. This development forced Marcus to accelerate his own plans. He began quietly gathering evidence that could be used to expose the conspiracy, including copies of the financial records that proved the false nature of the allegations against Prince William. More importantly, he started building a network of loyal guards and servants who could be trusted to act when the time came for direct confrontation. His most valuable ally proved to be Captain Helena Greystone, whose initial questions about the mysterious bonuses had been motivated by genuine concern rather than greed. When Marcus approached her with careful hints about corruption within the palace, she quickly understood the implications and offered her full support. Helena commanded the palace's night watch, giving her access to information about suspicious activities that occurred after most of the court had retired. "I've noticed irregular patterns in the guard schedules," Helena reported during a discreet meeting in the palace gardens. "Certain guards have been given assignments that put them in position to monitor the prince's movements, while others have been moved away from strategic positions like the treasury and the royal quarters."
"Someone is reorganizing our security to serve their own purposes."
This intelligence confirmed Marcus's suspicions about the scope of the conspiracy's penetration to the palace's defenses. Lady Cassandra hadn't just corrupted a few key nobles. She had systematically compromised the institution's ability to protect itself from internal threats. Meanwhile, Prince William had begun his own subtle campaign to shore up support among nobles who remained genuinely loyal to the crown. He couldn't openly challenge the investigative council without appearing to obstruct justice, but he could remind key allies of their oaths and their duty to protect the kingdom's independence. His conversations with trusted nobles revealed that many were uncomfortable with the rapid pace of recent developments, but felt pressured to go along with what appeared to be the Queen Regent's wishes. The prince's most important ally proved to be his elderly uncle, Duke Robert of Eastmarch, the late king's younger brother, who had remained neutral in court politics, but who commanded enormous respect among the older generation of nobles. When Prince William carefully shared his concerns about foreign influence in the current crisis, Duke Robert's reaction was immediate and decisive. "If what you suggest is true, nephew, then we face the gravest threat to our kingdom since the Dragon Wars," the old duke said, referring to the ancient conflicts with Draconia that had shaped Valdoria's national identity. "I may be old, but I remember what our ancestors sacrificed to keep this kingdom free. I will not see their legacy betrayed by ambitious courtiers and foreign gold." Duke Robert's support provided Prince William with a powerful ally who could speak to the older nobles with unquestionable authority. More importantly, the Duke commanded his own household guard and maintained significant influence over the kingdom's eastern provinces. If the crisis escalated to open conflict, his support could prove decisive. As the investigative council began its deliberations, Marcus initiated the final phase of his preparation for what he now saw as an inevitable confrontation. He couldn't allow the council to reach its predetermined conclusion that Prince William was unfit to rule, but he also couldn't act so precipitously that he would be dismissed as a rogue soldier pursuing a personal vendetta. The solution came from an unexpected source. Martha, the loyal cook who had disappeared earlier, managed to send a message through a network of servants loyal to the royal family. She had fled the palace when she learned that Lady Cassandra suspected her of providing information to Captain Thornfield, but she had not fled the kingdom. Instead, she had taken refuge with relatives in a nearby town and had been gathering intelligence about Lady Cassandra's connections to foreign agents. Martha's message revealed that Count Draven was not merely a trade negotiator, but a senior intelligence operative in the service of King Dracomar. More importantly, she had observed meetings between Lady Cassandra and other foreign agents, including representatives from kingdoms that had no official diplomatic relations with Valdoria. The conspiracy was apparently part of a broader effort to destabilize the region and create opportunities for draconian expansion. This intelligence gave Marcus the evidence he needed to frame the conspiracy as a matter of national security rather than merely a court intrigue. Treason was a serious crime, but treason committed in collaboration with foreign enemies was an act of war that justified immediate and decisive action. On the eve of the investigative council's planned announcement of its findings, Marcus made his final preparations for what he privately thought of as the Battle of the Palace. He had positioned loyal guards at key locations throughout the building, arranged for secure communication with Prince William and his allies, and prepared evidence packages that could be distributed to loyal nobles if the confrontation went badly. The night was unusually quiet, as if the very stones of the ancient palace were holding their breath in anticipation of the coming storm. Marcus walked his final rounds as captain of the guard, knowing that by tomorrow evening he would either have saved his kingdom or destroyed his own life in the attempt. The leather journal that had started this entire crisis lay safely hidden in his private quarters, its secrets preserved against the possibility that other evidence might be destroyed or discredited. Lady Cassandra's own words would condemn her if Marcus lived long enough to present them to an honest tribunal. The irony was that the conspirators' greatest strength, their careful documentation of their own treachery, would ultimately prove to be their downfall. As dawn approached, Marcus offered a quiet prayer to the ancient gods who were set to protect the rightful rulers of Valdoria. Tomorrow would test not just his courage and skill as a soldier, but his wisdom as a guardian of principles that transcended any individual life or personal ambition. The fate of the kingdom now rested in the hands of those who had sworn to protect it, and Marcus was determined to prove worthy of that sacred trust. Part 3. The morning that would determine the fate of Valdoria dawned with deceptive calm, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the palace courtyard, where generations of kings had walked before making decisions that shaped history. Marcus stood at his window, watching the early light illuminate the ancient stones, and felt the weight of destiny settling around him like armor he had worn for so many years it had become part of his skin. The investigative council was scheduled to present its findings at the noon assembly, and Marcus knew that Lady Cassandra intended to use that moment to deliver what she believed would be the fatal blow to Prince William's claim to the throne. The evidence against the prince had been carefully fabricated to appear damning while remaining technically deniable, a masterpiece of political manipulation that would leave him stripped of royal authority while technically preserving his life and freedom. But Marcus had spent the pre-dawn hours setting his own trap, one that would turn Lady Cassandra's moment of triumph into the revelation of her treachery. The loyal servants and guards he had cultivated over the past weeks were in position, each carrying out seemingly routine tasks that would collectively expose the conspiracy at precisely the moment when the conspirators believed themselves to be achieving victory. Prince William had proven himself worthy of the crown through his conduct during this crisis. Rather than raging against the false accusations or attempting to flee the kingdom, he had maintained his dignity while quietly building a network of support among those nobles who still believed in the principles of legitimate rule. His uncle, Duke Robert, had used his influence to ensure that several uncommitted nobles would attend the noon assembly, their presence adding weight to whatever revelations Marcus was prepared to make. The morning began, with the last piece of Marcus's preparation falling into place. Sir Edmund Blackwood arrived at the armory with news that the Prince's Guard, those knights and soldiers specifically sworn to William's personal service, remained absolutely loyal, despite attempts by Lady Cassandra's agents to corrupt or intimidate them. More importantly, Edmund had discovered the location where Count Draven was keeping his secret correspondence with the Draconian court, evidence that would prove beyond doubt that the conspiracy involved foreign enemies of the kingdom. The Draconian Count has been using a hidden chamber beneath the East Tower, Edmund reported, his scarred face grim with determination. I've seen him entering and leaving at odd hours, always carrying leather document cases. If we can secure those papers during the noon assembly, we'll have proof of the foreign involvement that even Lady Cassandra won't be able to explain away. Marcus nodded, feeling the final pieces of his plan lock into place. When the assembly begins, take 2 trusted men and secure that chamber. Bring whatever documents you find directly to the Great Hall regardless of what may be happening there. The truth must be revealed no matter the cost. As the morning progressed, the palace filled with tension that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Servants went about their duties with unusual quiet. Nobles gathered in small groups to whisper about the coming revelations, and even the normally cheerful kitchen staff seemed subdued by the weight of approaching change. Everyone sensed that this day would mark a turning point in the kingdom's history, though few understood exactly what form that change would take. Lady Cassandra spent the morning in final preparations with the investigative council, reviewing the evidence they would present and rehearsing the precise language they would use to justify their conclusions. Marcus watched from a distance as she moved through the palace with the confidence of someone who believed her victory was assured. She had no way of knowing that her private correspondence had been discovered, or that loyal members of the Guard had spent weeks documenting her meetings with foreign agents. Queen Alara appeared increasingly fragile as the morning wore on, the stress of the past weeks having taken a visible toll on her health and spirit. Marcus felt genuine sympathy for the regent, who had been manipulated into betraying her own son by someone she had trusted completely. The Queen's tragedy was that her love for her son had been weaponized against both of them by a woman who cared nothing for the royal family except as a means to her own power. At 11:30, the Great Hall began filling with nobles, court officials, and other dignitaries who had gathered to witness what they believed would be a solemn announcement about the prince's fitness to rule. The hall itself was a magnificent chamber that had hosted coronations, royal weddings, and state funerals for 3 centuries, its vaulted ceiling decorated with tapestries depicting the great victories and noble deeds of the Aldermarch dynasty. Archbishop Cornelius entered wearing his most formal robes, the ancient symbols of his office glittering with gold thread and precious gems. His performance during the morning's preparations had been flawless. He had successfully portrayed himself as a reluctant but dutiful servant of divine law who was forced by circumstances to question the royal succession. Only Marcus knew that the archbishop's apparent anguish was carefully calculated theatre designed to lend religious authority to a political coup. Lady Cassandra took her position at Queen Alara's right hand, her steel-grey hair perfectly arranged, and her face showing just the right mixture of sadness and resolve. She had dressed for the occasion in deep purple, the color of royal mourning, as if she were attending a funeral rather than a political proceeding. In a sense, Marcus reflected, she was. This was intended to be the funeral of Prince William's legitimate claim to the throne. Prince William himself entered the Great Hall with quiet dignity, accompanied by his loyal household guards, and followed by his uncle Duke Robert. The prince had chosen to wear simple court dress rather than royal regalia, a decision that emphasized his humility while avoiding any appearance of challenging the proceedings. His face showed calm acceptance of whatever judgment would be pronounced, though Marcus could see the steel beneath that composed exterior. As the assembly settled into expectant silence, Archbishop Cornelius stepped forward to begin the formal proceedings. His voice carried clearly through the vast chamber as he called upon divine guidance for the difficult deliberations ahead. The invocation was appropriately solemn and properly traditional, giving no hint of the political manipulation it was designed to sanctify. "My lords and ladies," the Archbishop intoned, "we gather today to address matters that touch upon the very foundation of our kingdom's governance. The sacred trust between ruler and ruled demands that those who would wear the crown must be worthy of its weight. When questions arise about such worthiness, our duty is clear. We must seek truth above all else, regardless of how painful that truth may prove to be." Lady Cassandra then rose to address the assembly, her voice carrying the authority of someone speaking on behalf of the Queen Regent. She presented the false financial evidence with masterful skill, framing the alleged irregularities as symptoms of deeper character flaws that would make Prince William unsuitable for the enormous responsibilities of kingship. "The evidence before us suggests a pattern of poor judgment and lack of fiscal responsibility that raises serious questions about His Royal Highness's readiness to manage the kingdom's affairs," she declared, holding up documents that Marcus knew had been carefully fabricated. "While these findings cause us all great sorrow, our duty to the realm must take precedence over our personal affections." The assembled nobles listened with varying degrees of belief and skepticism. Some of Lady Cassandra's co-conspirators nodded gravely, as if these revelations confirmed their worst fears about the young prince. Others looked uncomfortable with the proceedings, sensing something false in the smooth presentation, but unable to identify exactly what was wrong. It was at this moment, the peak of Lady Cassandra's apparent triumph, that Marcus chose to spring his trap. He stepped forward from his position near the great doors, his captain's uniform gleaming in the morning light that streamed through the hall's tall windows. "My lords and ladies," Marcus announced in a voice that cut through the hushed whispers like a sword through silk, "I must interrupt these proceedings to present evidence of grave crimes that threaten the very security of our kingdom." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Lady Cassandra's face went pale, though she quickly tried to recover her composure. Queen Alara looked confused and alarmed, while Prince William maintained his calm exterior, despite the obvious surprise in his eyes. The assembled nobles turned to stare at Marcus, unsure whether they were witnessing an act of courage or an act of treason. "Captain Thornfield," Lady Cassandra said sharply, "these proceedings are conducted under the authority of Her Majesty the Queen Regent." "You have no right to disrupt. I have the right and the duty to protect this kingdom from its enemies," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years of faithful service. "And I have evidence that those enemies have infiltrated this very court." He reached into his uniform and withdrew Lady Cassandra's stolen journal, its crimson ribbon and royal seal clearly visible to everyone in the hall. The sight of her private correspondence in Marcus's hands sent a shock through Lady Cassandra that she could not entirely conceal. "This journal contains detailed records of a conspiracy to prevent Prince William from taking his rightful place on the throne," Marcus announced, opening the leather-bound volume to a marked page. "It documents payments made to corrupt members of this court, plans to fabricate evidence against His Royal Highness, and most damning of all, treasonous negotiations with agents of the Kingdom of Draconia." The great hall erupted in shocked murmurs and angry exclamations. Several nobles rose from their seats, demanding to examine the evidence, while others called for order. Lady Cassandra stood frozen, her carefully crafted plans crumbling around her like a house of cards in a windstorm. "These are lies," she finally managed to cry out. "This man has fabricated evidence to support his own treacherous designs. Captain Thornfield has been acting suspiciously for weeks, meeting secretly with the prince and undermining the legitimate investigation into—" "Let the evidence speak for itself," Marcus replied calmly, and began reading directly from Lady Cassandra's own words. "The prince's coronation must be delayed indefinitely. Our contacts within the Temple of the Sacred Crown have been informed. The Archbishop will discover irregularities in the ancient texts that question the legitimacy of the ceremony." Archbishop Cornelius went white as death as his own complicity was exposed. The elderly prelate began backing away from the center of the hall, his ornate robe suddenly seeming more like a costume than legitimate vestments of office. Marcus continued reading, revealing the details of financial payments to corrupt guards, the manipulation of Queen Alara's maternal concerns, and most devastating of all, the specific concessions that Lady Cassandra had promised to make to Draconia in exchange for their support of her coup. It was at this dramatic moment that Sir Edmund Blackwood entered the Great Hall, flanked by 2 loyal knights and carrying an ornate wooden chest that Marcus recognized as the container for Count Draven's secret correspondence. The timing was perfect. Edmund's arrival provided additional proof of the conspiracy just as Lady Cassandra's supporters were beginning to rally around claims that the journal might be fabricated. "Your Majesty," Edmund announced, approaching the throne where Queen Ilara sat in stunned silence. This chest was recovered from a hidden chamber used by the Draconian envoy, Count Victor Draven. It contains correspondence between Lady Cassandra and the court of King Dracomar, detailing plans for the systematic dismantling of our kingdom's sovereignty. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Edmund opened the chest to reveal dozens of letters written in Lady Cassandra's distinctive handwriting, each one outlining specific aspects of her agreement to betray Valdoria's interests in exchange for draconian support. The letters discussed trade concessions that would cripple the kingdom's economy, military agreements that would leave Valdoria defenseless against future draconian expansion, and even negotiations about potential marriage alliances that would ultimately place a draconian prince on the throne of Valdoria. As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, the mood in the Great Hall shifted from confusion to outrage. Loyal nobles who had been deceived by Lady Cassandra's manipulation began calling for immediate justice, while her co-conspirators looked around desperately for escape routes that no longer existed. Duke Aldrich attempted to blend into the crowd, hoping to avoid association with the exposed plot, while Duchess Helena began loudly proclaiming her innocence and claiming she had been coerced into cooperation. Count Draven himself chose that moment to make his appearance, apparently unaware that his secret communications had been discovered. He entered the Great Hall, expecting to witness Lady Cassandra's triumph, only to find himself walking into the center of an exposed conspiracy. His smooth diplomatic demeanor evaporated instantly when he saw his own correspondence being examined by angry nobles who were beginning to understand how completely they had been manipulated. "Seize the foreign agent!" Duke Robert commanded, his elderly voice carrying surprising authority. Several loyal knights moved to surround Count Draven, who made a desperate attempt to reach the hall's side exit before being restrained. His capture provided visible proof that the conspiracy involved foreign enemies, removing any doubt about the treasonous nature of Lady Cassandra's activities. Queen Ilara finally found her voice, though it shook with emotion as she struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the betrayal by her closest advisor. "Cassandra," she whispered, the name carrying decades of friendship and trust that had been utterly violated. "How could you do this to our family? How could you betray everything we have built together?" Lady Cassandra's composure finally cracked completely. Faced with irrefutable evidence of her treachery and surrounded by nobles who now understood her role in the conspiracy, she abandoned any pretense of innocence. "You were weak," she snarled at the Queen Regent, her voice filled with years of suppressed ambition and resentment. "All of you were weak. This kingdom needed strong leadership, real leadership, not the sentimental rule of a boy who has never faced real challenges." Her outburst only further condemned her in the eyes of the Assembly. Even those nobles who might have harbored private doubts about Prince William's readiness for kingship were appalled by Lady Cassandra's admission that she had been willing to sell their kingdom's independence to achieve her goals. Prince William chose that moment to step forward, his voice carrying the authority of rightful kingship as he addressed the Assembly. "My lords and ladies," he said quietly, "today we have seen how quickly the foundations of legitimate rule can be undermined by those who value personal ambition above the common good. We have also seen how the vigilance and loyalty of faithful servants can preserve those foundations when they are threatened." He turned to Marcus, recognition and gratitude evident in his voice. "Captain Thornfield, your service to this crown and this kingdom will be remembered as long as our line endures. You have proven that true loyalty lies not in blind obedience to those who hold power, but in faithful service to the principles that make power legitimate." The prince then addressed his mother, his voice gentle but firm. "Your Majesty, I know that your heart was always with our family and our kingdom. The betrayal you have suffered today is not a reflection of your judgment, but of the skill of those who would exploit the very virtues that make you worthy of the crown you have worn with such grace." Queen Ilara rose from her throne, tears streaming down her face as she approached her son. "My dear boy," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "can you forgive a foolish old woman who nearly let ambition disguised as wisdom destroy everything your father built?"
"There is nothing to forgive, Mother," Prince William replied, embracing the woman who had protected the kingdom during his minority despite the manipulation she had endured. "You were betrayed by someone you trusted completely."
"That betrayal speaks to her character, not yours." The formal resolution of the crisis came swiftly once the evidence had been presented. Lady Cassandra was immediately arrested on charges of high treason, as were her primary co-conspirators, Duke Aldrich and Duchess Helena. Count Draven would be expelled from the kingdom after a brief interrogation to determine what intelligence he might have gathered for his draconian masters. Archbishop Cornelius, his complicity in the conspiracy having been thoroughly exposed, would face church tribunal before any civil proceedings. Most importantly, the investigative council's findings were immediately declared null and void. The fabricated evidence against Prince William was publicly revealed as fraudulent, and preparations began for the coronation ceremony that would finally place the rightful king on the throne of Valdoria. As the great hall slowly emptied, with nobles departing to spread word of the day's dramatic revelations throughout the kingdom, Marcus found himself standing alone with Prince William in the vast chamber, where he had risked everything to preserve the principle of legitimate rule. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, offering the formal address that acknowledged William's true status regardless of whether the coronation had yet taken place, "it has been my honor to serve the crown during this crisis." "The honor has been mine, Captain Thornfield," the prince replied. "You have taught me that the crown's greatest protection lies not in the strength of its armies or the wealth of its treasury, but in the loyalty of those who serve its highest principles rather than its temporary holders." Marcus felt a profound sense of completion as he looked around the great hall, where his actions had preserved not just a kingdom, but the idea that power must be earned through legitimacy rather than seized through treachery. The leather journal that had revealed Lady Cassandra's conspiracy would be preserved in the royal archives, as a reminder that vigilance was the price of freedom, and that even the most trusted advisors could harbor ambitions that threatened everything they claimed to protect. The crisis was over, but the lessons it had taught would endure for generations. The kingdom of Valdoria would crown its rightful king, its independence would be preserved, and its people would understand that their freedom depended on the courage of those who chose duty over safety when the moment of testing came. Part 4. The coronation of King William I of Valdoria took place 3 weeks after the exposure of Lady Cassandra's conspiracy, on a crisp autumn morning that seemed to herald a new era for the kingdom. The great hall had been transformed with banners bearing the royal arms, golden tapestries depicting the heroic deeds of past monarchs, and flowers that filled the ancient chamber with the sweet scent of hope restored. Every detail spoke of renewal and legitimate authority triumphant over treachery and foreign manipulation. Archbishop Cornelius's role in the conspiracy had necessitated bringing in a prelate from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria to perform the sacred ceremony. Archbishop Marcus of Astoria was an elderly cleric of unquestioned integrity, whose presence lent additional legitimacy to the proceedings, while symbolically demonstrating that William's claim to the throne was recognized beyond Valdoria's borders. The foreign archbishop's involvement also served as a powerful rebuke to King Dracomar's attempts to interfere in Valdorian affairs. Captain Marcus Thornfield stood in his place of honor among the assembled nobles, wearing a new uniform that bore the distinctive golden cord marking him as a knight commander of the Royal Guard. The elevation in rank had been Prince William's first official act upon assuming full royal authority, a recognition that went far beyond simple reward for faithful service. Marcus now commanded not just the palace guard, but the kingdom's entire security apparatus, a responsibility that reflected the young king's understanding of how close they had come to losing everything. The ceremony itself was magnificent in its ancient solemnity. As Archbishop Marcus placed the crown of Aldermarch upon William's head, the weight of 8 centuries of legitimate rule seemed to settle upon the young monarch's shoulders. The crown was an artifact of incredible historical significance. Its golden circlet set with gems that had been worn by every legitimate ruler since the kingdom's founding. Each precious stone carried the memory of victories won and crises survived, and now it would witness the beginning of a reign that had been preserved through the courage of loyal servants and the exposure of hidden enemies. Queen Mother Alara, her title now reflecting her new status as the king's mother rather than regent, watched the ceremony with tears of pride and relief. The past weeks had aged her visibly, the stress of discovering her closest advisor's betrayal having taken a toll that no royal physician could entirely heal. But today her face showed peace as well as pride, the satisfaction of a duty completed and a trust successfully transferred to worthy hands. King William's coronation oath resonated through the Great Hall with particular power given the recent crisis the kingdom had survived. When he pledged to protect Valdoria from all enemies, foreign and domestic, every person present understood that these were not merely ceremonial words, but a promise forged in the fires of real danger. The new king had already proven his commitment to those principles during the weeks when his very claim to the throne had been under assault. The investigation that followed Lady Cassandra's arrest had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy that had threatened Valdoria's independence. Under interrogation, she had admitted to negotiating agreements that would have gradually transferred control of the kingdom's most strategic assets to draconian interests. The port cities would have been open to draconian naval forces under the guise of joint patrols. The eastern provinces would have been ceded as payment for draconian financial support, and ultimately the kingdom would have been reduced to little more than a draconian protectorate. Perhaps most disturbing had been the discovery that the conspiracy reached beyond Valdoria's borders. Count Draven's correspondence revealed that similar operations were being conducted in other kingdoms throughout the region, part of King Dracomar's broader strategy to achieve through corruption and manipulation what his ancestors had failed to win through direct military conquest. Valdoria's successful exposure of the plot had likely prevented similar coups in neighboring realms, making King William's first act as monarch a victory for legitimate rule throughout the known world. Duke Aldrich and Duchess Helena had been tried for treason and found guilty, though their sentences reflected the degrees of their culpability. Duke Aldrich, who had been an active participant in planning the conspiracy, was stripped of his titles and exiled from the kingdom. His lands were redistributed to nobles who had remained loyal during the crisis, ensuring that the eastern provinces would be governed by those whose allegiance to the crown had been tested and proven. Duchess Helena, whose participation had been motivated by threats against her family rather than personal ambition, received a lesser sentence of house arrest and the loss of her voice in the royal council. Her son's gambling debts, the leverage used to coerce her cooperation, were paid by the crown as an act of mercy that demonstrated the new king's understanding of how good people could be manipulated into bad acts. Lady Cassandra herself faced the ultimate penalty for treason. Her execution had been carried out privately, without the public spectacle that such events had sometimes involved in the past. King William had insisted on dignity even for a traitor, understanding that the manner of her death would reflect upon the character of his reign. Her final words, reported by the prison chaplain, had been a warning about the growing ambition of King Dracomar and a grudging admission that Prince William, now King William, had indeed proven himself worthy of the crown she had tried to steal. The exposure of the conspiracy had also led to significant reforms in the kingdom's government structure. King William, working closely with his uncle Duke Robert and other trusted advisors, had implemented new safeguards against future attempts at internal subversion. The Royal Guard would now include officers from each of the kingdom's major provinces, making it impossible for any single individual to control access to the crown. Financial oversight would be shared among multiple officials, preventing the kind of manipulation that had made the false evidence against William seem credible. Most importantly, a new council of royal investigators would be established, their sole duty being to monitor for signs of foreign interference or internal conspiracy. Marcus had played a central role in designing these new security measures, his experience during the crisis having given him unique insights into the vulnerabilities that ambitious conspirators could exploit. His elevation to Knight Commander was not merely ceremonial. It represented a fundamental expansion of his authority to protect the crown from threats that might not be apparent until they had already taken root in the palace's daily operations.
The international implications of the conspiracy's exposure were significant and far-reaching.
King Dacromar had been forced to publicly disavow Count Draven's activities, claiming that the envoy had been acting without authorization. This transparent fiction fooled no one, but it provided the diplomatic cover necessary to avoid immediate military confrontation. Nevertheless, the relationship between the two kingdoms was now openly hostile, rather than merely competitive, and King William had begun negotiations with other regional powers to form defensive alliances against future draconian expansion. The Kingdom of Astoria, whose archbishop had performed William's coronation, had already signed a mutual defense pact that would provide military assistance if either kingdom came under attack. Similar agreements were being negotiated with the maritime republics to the south and the mountain kingdoms to the north. Lady Cassandra's conspiracy had inadvertently strengthened Valdoria's position by revealing the true nature of draconian ambitions and galvanizing opposition to them among neighboring powers. Domestically, the crisis had actually strengthened the monarchy by demonstrating both the dangers of divided loyalty and the rewards of faithful service. The nobles who had remained loyal during the conspiracy's exposure found their positions enhanced, while those who had wavered learned valuable lessons about the importance of supporting legitimate authority. King William's handling of the crisis had earned him respect that might have taken years to develop under normal circumstances. The young king had also used the conspiracy's exposure as an opportunity to address long-standing grievances that ambitious manipulators might have exploited in the future. Tax policies were reformed to reduce the burden on smaller landholders, trade agreements were renegotiated to ensure more equitable distribution of benefits, and a new system of royal hearings was established to give ordinary citizens direct access to the crown's justice. These reforms served both to strengthen the kingdom's social fabric and to eliminate the kinds of resentments that foreign agents might use to recruit domestic collaborators. Perhaps most importantly, King William had demonstrated wisdom beyond his years in his treatment of those who had been deceived by Lady Cassandra's manipulation. Rather than seeking revenge against everyone who had supported the conspiracy, he had distinguished between those who acted from ambition and those who acted from fear or misunderstanding. This mercy, combined with firmness toward the truly guilty, had helped heal the divisions that the conspiracy had created within the court. 6 months after his coronation, King William presided over a kingdom that was stronger and more unified than it had been before the crisis began. The threat from Draconia remained, but Valdoria was better prepared to face that threat thanks to the lessons learned during Lady Cassandra's conspiracy. The royal guard was more vigilant, the noble houses were more clearly aligned with the crown's interests, and the kingdom's international alliances were stronger than they had been in generations. Marcus continued to serve as Knight Commander with the same dedication he had shown as a simple captain, but his role had evolved to encompass far more than palace security. He had become King William's most trusted advisor on matters of internal security and foreign intelligence. His reputation for loyalty and competence having spread throughout the known world, foreign envoys now understood that any attempt to corrupt Valdoria's government would face the scrutiny of a man whose vigilance had already exposed one major conspiracy. The leather journal that had first revealed Lady Cassandra's treachery was preserved in the royal archives, its pages serving as a permanent reminder of how easily trust could be betrayed and how vigilance was the price of freedom. King William had ordered that excerpts from the journal be included in the training materials for future royal guards, ensuring that the lessons learned from the conspiracy would not be forgotten by subsequent generations. On quiet evenings, when the palace's daily business was complete and the ancient stones held only the whispered conversations of history, Marcus would sometimes walk through the corridors where he had first discovered the conspiracy that threatened everything he had sworn to protect. The weight of his new responsibilities was considerable, but it was balanced by the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and principles preserved. The crisis had tested every assumption Marcus had held about loyalty, duty, and the nature of legitimate authority. He had been forced to choose between obedience to current power and faithfulness to enduring principles, between the safety of following orders and the danger of acting on his own judgment. The choices he had made during those crucial weeks would define not only his own legacy, but the character of the kingdom he had helped to preserve. King William's reign was still young, and many challenges lay ahead. The threat from Draconia had not disappeared, but had merely taken new forms, requiring constant vigilance and careful diplomacy. Domestic issues remained that would test the young monarch's wisdom and resolve. The work of building a stronger, more just kingdom would require years of patient effort and careful reform. But the foundation for that work had been laid during the crisis that brought William to the throne. The exposure of Lady Cassandra's conspiracy had demonstrated that Valdoria's greatest strength lay not in its armies or its wealth, but in the loyalty of those who served its highest ideals rather than its temporary holders of power. The kingdom had learned that freedom required not just brave soldiers to defend its borders, but vigilant guardians to protect its principles from corruption within. As Marcus stood in the great hall where he had first exposed the conspiracy, watching King William hold court with wisdom and justice, he felt a profound sense of completion. The leather journal, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, had led to the preservation of a kingdom and the triumph of legitimate rule over ambitious treachery. The young soldier who had sworn an oath to protect the crown had become a knight whose vigilance would guard that crown for generations to come. The story of the silent coup that failed would be remembered as long as the kingdom of Valdoria endured, a reminder that the price of freedom was eternal vigilance, and that the most dangerous enemies were often those who claimed to be the most trusted friends. In preserving King William's rightful claim to the throne, Marcus had helped preserve something far more precious than any individual ruler: the principle that power must be earned through legitimacy and maintained through justice. The future remained unwritten, full of challenges and opportunities that would test the kingdom's strength and the wisdom of its rulers. But the foundation had been preserved, the throne protected, and the principles of legitimate rule upheld against the most sophisticated conspiracy in the kingdom's history. Whatever trials lay ahead, Valdoria would face them with the knowledge that its guardians had proven worthy of their trust when the moment of testing came. In the end, the greatest victory was not the exposure of Lady Cassandra's conspiracy or the prevention of Draconian conquest, but the demonstration that duty and loyalty could triumph over ambition and treachery when good people chose to act with courage and wisdom. The kingdom of Valdoria had been preserved not by the strength of its armies, but by the character of its guardians. and that lesson would endure long after the immediate crisis had passed into history. The crown was secure, the kingdom was free, and the principles that made both possible had been tested in the fires of real danger and emerged stronger than ever before. Captain Marcus Thornfield had begun this story as a simple soldier doing his duty. He ended it as Knight Commander Marcus Thornfield, guardian of a kingdom and protector of the ideals that made freedom possible. The transformation reflected not just his own growth, but the growth of an entire kingdom that had learned the true meaning of loyalty and the real price of liberty.